finalizing a deal with Iran to end the ongoing conflict, further claiming that Tehran has now agreed to hand over its stockpile of enriched uranium. Now, speaking with the reporters at the White House, President Trump says that we are very close in making a deal with Iran, and we had to make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, and they've totally agreed to that. They've agreed to almost everything, and this is where President Trump has been saying that they have agreed, that is, Iran has now agreed to give us back nuclear dust. That is the term that is used for enriched uranium that US says could be used to build nuclear weapons. And however, when it comes to this latest statement there, will it now extend the ceasefire or put an end to the conflict? Well, first, let's listen in what President Trump said.
The big thing we have to do is we have to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, because if they do, you want to talk about problems, you'd have problems. So very important is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and they've agreed to that. Iran's agreed to that, and they've agreed to it very powerfully. They've agreed to give us back the nuclear dust that's way underground because of the attack we made with the B-2 bombers. So we have a lot of agreement with Iran, and I think something's going to happen very positive.
Let's now talk about Iran, because Iran, on this latest statement by President Trump, has completely and categorically rejected President Trump's claims of a nuclear breakthrough, dismissing them to be as baseless and a lie. Tehran has denied having any agreement to hand over enriched uranium, contradicting President Trump's assertion of a near-final deal. Iranian officials have made it clear that there has been no talks on any uranium transfer, rejecting the very premise of the US claim. And this is a sharp rebuttal coming in from Tehran's side, calling President's statements to be a lie, signaling that there is still a deep mistrust between the two sides. Now, let's get you exactly when it comes to what President Trump has been saying and what Iran has now been rejecting. Let's take you through as far as the contentions coming in from both sides. What are the US leadership saying versus when it comes to Tehran? So President Trump says close on making a deal with Iran. Tehran says, well, there has been no talks when it comes to any handover of enriched uranium. No talks. Iran agreed on not having any nukes. This is what President Trump has been claiming. Iran denies, saying that Trump is lying when it comes to nuclear negotiations. Trump says that Iran agreed to return nuclear dust. That is the term used for enriched uranium. However, Iran says that talks will only happen on our terms and conditions, which the US has to agree. Now, that seems to be the very bone of contention, the sticking points there, where talks have neither progressed from the first round of talks. And Shinjoy, good morning. What will then happen when it comes to the second round of talks? Because these are the pressing issues that still remain as the topmost points for both of the sides, whether be it enriched uranium and whether be it the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, thank you. First of all, if you're going to have talks about issues as sensitive as nuclear weapons, as sensitive as the Strait of Hormuz, it's better that the talks stay below radar. If you're going to talk about it and make it public, and these are discussions as difficult as they are, then they are going to be even more difficult. So Iran says something, America says something else, and vice versa. So this is not the best way of negotiation, but as Kennedy once said, let us negotiate without fear, and let us not fear to negotiate. But it's also important when you are negotiating to be quiet about it and not tell the whole world where your position is and where your the other party's position is. But how these talks go when they do begin is very crucial for the peace of the Middle East, for the peace of West Asia, primarily because if this goes wrong, then the repercussions will be very, very worrying. Because think about it, there's been 40 days of fighting,
yes,
and it has already created terrible situations in different parts of the world. The Iranians have suffered, people in the Gulf states have suffered,
yes,
people in Israel have suffered, people in other nearby countries have suffered. Now, if all this were to start again, and in a worse way, then things will look very difficult, not just for people of the area,
yes,
but people of the world.
Absolutely, because all eyes would be on the second round of talks. It is still undecided when it will happen. However, it is being said that Pakistan would be holding the second round of talks again. But there still seems to be a very deep mistrust, this trust deficit that seems to be building up between the Iranian and the US side. But let's, in the meantime, get you another understanding of what President Trump has been saying, because he believes that everything is going well and the US is in full control. And President Trump has already, called himself as this decisive leader who is now aiming at bringing world peace, with Iran now not having the requirement or the control to have and acquire a nuclear weapon. He says that we can do what we want and we have the best military in the world, and the conflict will come, to an end very soon. However, he seems to be defending when it comes to the US stance of the Iranian strike, saying that we cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That is something that he has been saying from the start, where he now seems to be upping with the rhetoric and saying that there is little now which needs to be done as far as when it comes to militarily, the objectives of the United States has been achieved. And he's now been saying that we can still do whatever we want, and pulling up the stakes, what President Trump had also said to an interview at a foreign media outlet, well, if he needs to pull up the stakes, then it will take at least 20 years for Iran to rebuild. Now, as far as what President Trump has been saying, that is also now been seconded by his leadership, his administration as well. President Trump is now of the opinion saying that we can do whatever we want, and however, he has been claiming that the war may end soon. However, there is still a lot of uncertainty, because the 21st of April, that seems to be the first round of ceasefire that has now been implemented and still remains in control, though very fragile. But however, will that be extended, or will there be lasting peace that will be brought to the region? Because now it totally depends on the both sides. US President Donald Trump, however, seems to be upping the rhetoric, saying that we have to do a little journey down to Iran. And I don't want to do that, but we have to do that because we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. When he's come back to his main objective of not allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and he says this is something that they are very close on that deal, which he believes that Iran has also agreed.
Very well, and I will say the war in Iran is going along swimmingly. We can do whatever we want, and it should be ending pretty soon. It was perfect. I mean, it's perfect. It was the power we have, our military. We have the most powerful military anywhere in the world. I built it 4 years, my first 4 years, and we're still building it.
So while President Trump says that we are very close in ending the conflict or war with Iran, however, his war minister seems to be contradicting him. Pete Hegseth is of the opinion that we are ready, the US military is ready, they are locked and loaded, and they're ready to hit power plants and energy infrastructure. This was one of the warnings, however, President Trump did give before announcing that ceasefire with Iran. However, there seems to be a lot of climb down on his stance as well. But Pete Hegseth is of the opinion, saying that, on one side, President Trump has been claiming that Iran's war endgame is near, and the US is very close on making a deal with Iran. But when it comes to Pete Hegseth, he is now issuing a fresh warning to Iran.
For decades, Iran killed Americans with roadside bombs in Iraq, using cowardly proxies to do their dirty work while they hid safely in Tehran. They struck our embassies with car bombs and attacked from the shadows, never daring to face us toe-to-toe. They thought they could bleed America with impunity. Well, they just learned the hard way what happens when you try to fight us directly. And even when they got lucky, one time in 40 days, and downed 2 of our pilots, they couldn't hold them. In a daring 14-hour rescue operation, 7 hours in daylight and 7 hours of night, both pilots were recovered safely. Not once, but twice. A daylight thunder run right up the middle of their country, boots on the ground. A midnight raid right up the middle of their country, boots on the ground. 0 American casualties. The Iranians humiliated and demoralized. We control their fate, not the other way around. That's why they came to the table.
Well, the conflict, Srinjoy, may be in control as of now when it comes to this very fragile ceasefire that still seems to be holding, but there is no end to the war of words.
First of all, it's probably in these circumstances easier to win a war than to win the peace. And both sides have declared victory. It's very rare that after 40 days of very serious fighting, you will have both sides declaring victory, particularly in these times. Now the Iranians have declared victory, the Americans have declared victory. Now who has lost is not very clear, except that thousands and thousands of people have suffered and are still suffering. Now is that one opportunity to make peace. And whether it's in Pakistan, whether it's anywhere else, if people sit down and at least decide on two things, the fact that they will continue talking, and even if it takes a long period of time, and the fact that the ceasefire will be extended to a longer period, then two major developments would have happened, and it would be two very big steps forward. Now, apart from that, come the other issues that come later, whether it's the nuclear issue, whether it's Hormuz, whether it's Lebanon.
The sticking point there, if actually talks will progress in a a peaceful manner or not. Patikrit is also connected with us. Srinjoy continues to be with us. Patikrit, good morning. Are you looking at a war endgame or an escalation?
Neither. Right now, the war is not going to end. The clouds of war will perpetually remain here, but it appears that they will continue to talk, and even if the talks fail, at least there would be attempts that, every fortnight there might be some extension of the ceasefire, at least for some time. However, the second round of talks is very crucial. If in this round also the adamancy continues, then it is definitely a challenge. The problem is both sides have put their red lines so strongly that neither side is willing to bend or be a little flexible. So the clouds of war will definitely remain there for a long period to come. But as Srinjoy mentioned, even if they agree to disagree and talk for some time, then other players might also come, other players in the sense, other major countries, and ask them to soothe down. Right now, there are too many players in America and Iran who want the war to continue. That is not a good sign. However, there is fatigue from both sides as well. For the United States also, in spite of all what they say, there is a shortage. There is a problem with casualties, and whatever Hexet says or others say, the reality is that continuing a war for a long period of time may not be feasible even for the United States. So both sides are looking for an exit route, but the red lines are so strong for both sides that it is unlikely in the short term that they would agree on something. However, if they continue to agree to disagree and keep on talking, that might soothe the nerves at least as for a better day tomorrow.
Well, that has been a war of words, however, that has been continuing unabated. But as you said, the second round of talks would be very crucial to see if there is any possible and a lasting breakthrough. Thank you very much, Patikrit, for your point of view. Now, let's talk about two very different individuals and two very different roles that they have been playing. President Trump on one side and Pope Leo on the other side. Well, of course, the Pope will advocate for peace. He will advocate for when it comes to an end of war, and he believes and he says that war is nothing but destruction and devastation, and especially when it comes to this week-long feud that is now being seen. And of course, the times that we have also seen both sides have been exchanging such kind of statements that have now come in, will only now see as an veiled point of view that the Pope has now been given, not directly issued at President Trump, but the reference seems to be very clear. President Trump, on the other hand, is of the opinion that Pope's priorities are very different, and he doesn't understand the ground situation because he believes that Iran in no way should be armed with a nuclear weapon. Because if that happens, then there will no longer be world peace. Let's listen in to both sides.
I have nothing against the Pope. If the Pope looked at the 42,000 people that were killed over the last 2 or 3 months as a protester with no weapons, no nothing, I mean, you take a look at that. So I can disagree with the Pope. I have a right to disagree. I have nothing against the Pope. if the Pope looked at the 42,000 people that were killed over the last 2 or 3 months as a protester with no weapons, no nothing, I mean, you take a look at that. So I can disagree with the Pope. I have a right to disagree.
So the Pope believes that no war is the answer to peace, and President Trump believes that after this war, with the Iran having nuclear weapon, would be the answer to lasting peace. Let's listen into another statement.
Very important that the Pope understands. Very, very important. It would be nice not to say it. Iran killed 42,000 people that were totally unarmed protesters. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they did, every country, including Italy, where he's stationed, every single country in the world would be in trouble. So we're doing very well with respect to that, having to do with the whole situation on Iran.
Well, Srinjoy, the very definition of peace is very different from what the Pope has been propagating and what President Trump has been saying. Both want peace, however.
Yes, you would expect the Pope to speak for peace, and he has been. And this is what got him into trouble with the president. Now, very rarely has any world leader spoken out against the Pope in the way that the president has. And the president probably now realizes, considering what he has said subsequently, that 20% of the people of America, 20%, including his vice president, J.D. Vance, are Catholic. And any criticism of the Pope, belittling the Pope, is not a good idea. And which is why he's toned down his statements to an extent. And he has said what he has said in these last 2-3 days, that the Pope doesn't understand how geopolitics works and how world politics works and so on. Now, that is still a bit of a criticism. And therefore, how 20% of voters who are Roman Catholic in America will vote in the midterms if they remember this fight between these two leaders remains to be seen. Trump heads the world's most powerful country. The Pope heads the world's smallest country geographically. But there are more Roman Catholics in the world than more Americans. And this is something the Pope can speak with great pride about.
Yes.
Now, at this point,
yes,
the earlier this war of words comes to an end, the better it will be for Trump and for everybody else.
Yes, because in a way that he seems to be sermonizing the Pope. I mean, to say that he says that Pope doesn't understand the geopolitical situation and the stance on nuclear weapons. He says that Iran has been killing its own people, the innocents. There are thousands of them. However, President Trump maintains that he has nothing against the Pope.
Very important that the Pope understands. Very, very important. It would be nice not to say it. Iran killed 42,000 people that were totally unarmed protesters. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they did, every country, including Italy, where he's stationed, every single country in the world would be in trouble. So we're doing very well with respect to that, having to do with the whole situation on Iran.
Well, speaking on President Trump, he's given out another statement, and this is the other round of conflict, which in a way is also linked to Iran. Now, President Trump has announced that Israel and Lebanon have now agreed to a 10-day ceasefire. President Trump has asserted that he will invite both Bibi, which is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Lebanese president to the White House for a meeting soon, and the first meaningful dialogue that is expected to take place after over 3 decades. He also says that both sides wanted peace, and which he believes will happen quickly.
Will Hezbollah stick to the ceasefire? Are you confident about that?
I think they will. I think it's going to be, actually it's very exciting because it's 48 years. We're going to be meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, as you know, and the president of Lebanon. And I had a great talk with both of them today. They're going to be having a ceasefire, and that'll include Hezbollah. And I think it could be number 10 for me.
So let's tell you exactly what has been happening after this Iran ceasefire that has now come into place. Was Lebanon a part of it or not? Because there has been another round of talks where US has been playing the mediator between Israel and Lebanon, and this 10-day ceasefire has been announced. So what has happened behind the doors, behind the scenes there? Trump and Netanyahu holding a very tense conversation there. What has now been said that either they talk or they risk US declaring a ceasefire unilaterally. Then there has been a strategic pushback as well, because Netanyahu wanted Lebanon to be kept out of the Iran-US-Israel ceasefire, and this is something that both US and Israel have been maintaining. And this strategic pushback is concerned. Trump says that Israel has also needs to strike back when it comes to its continuous attacks and targeted attacks, especially when it comes to southern Lebanon is concerned, because which remains the Hezbollah stronghold. Then the final call that actually seals the shift towards talks with Lebanon, and the US representatives both from the Israeli and from the Lebanese side, they met in Washington, and that was also done as far as the mediation under Marco Rubio, who is the US Secretary of State. And now what is being said that both sides are actually looking for lasting peace. But President Trump, however, seems to be now urging Iran-backed Hezbollah also to abide by the ceasefire with Israel that has now come into effect. So this 10-day ceasefire there, because there are already reports of ceasefire violations that has now been reported, and this is now coming at a time when President Trump is now also asking Hezbollah, which is an Iran-backed proxy, to abide with the ceasefire.
Hezbollah stick to the ceasefire? Are you confident about that?
I think they will. I think it's going to be, actually, it's very exciting because it's 48 years. We're going to be meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, as you know, and the president of Lebanon. And I had a great talk with both of them today. They're going to be having a ceasefire, and that'll include Hezbollah. And I think it could be number 10 for me.
So this is a new ceasefire announcement, a 10-day ceasefire that now comes into effect between Israel and Lebanon. However, there are reports of certain violations as well. Remains to be seen how lasting will this ceasefire would be, because there are more positive rounds of peace that are now expected to happen in Washington, D.C. We're going to head into a very short break, viewers. Back after on the other side with more news and updates.